cannot continue to ignore.
Before Wall Street, before the Federal Reserve, before modern finance had names, formulas, or regulations, there was a morning that changed everything. It was still dark over Paris on Friday, October 13th, 1307, a date that would haunt Western culture for the next 700 years. In the misty silence before dawn, thousands of royal agents moved through the streets with a single mission, sealed by the king himself. At the stroke of sunrise, doors were smashed open, boots thundered down stone corridors, and Europe's most respected warriors, the Knights Templar, were dragged from their beds in chains. If you've ever wondered why Friday the 13th became a symbol of fear, this is the real story. But here's the part almost no one is taught. This wasn't a religious purge. It wasn't about heresy, secret rituals, or the wild accusations that filled the king's decrees. It was something far more modern and far more familiar. It was the world's first sovereign debt crisis. King Philip IV of France owed the Templars an enormous sum of money, so much that repaying it would bankrupt his crown. He had already taxed minorities into exile. He had already debased his currency until it rattled public trust. And when he reached once more for the Templars' treasury, they finally said no. In that moment, Philip understood a truth that echoes through every financial collapse in history. When a government can't pay its debts, it turns against its creditors. And the Templars were not just any creditors. They were Europe's first international banking network, a system so advanced that kings depended on it, merchants feared it, and pilgrims trusted it more than their own monarchs. They had vaults in every major city. They invented letters of credit. They pioneered financial tools centuries ahead of their time. And in doing so, they became more powerful than the men who wore crowns. That made them indispensable. It also made them dangerous. So on that Friday morning, Philip changed the rules. He turned financial failure into criminal accusation. He turned debt into justification for destruction. And he unleashed a campaign of arrests, torture, and forced confessions designed to collapse the Templars' balance sheet by annihilating the institution behind it. What happened next wasn't a scandal, it was a financial coup. Because the fastest way to erase a debt is not to repay it, it's to eliminate the people you owe. And the fall of the Knights Templar, brutal, rapid, and politically engineered, would become one of the earliest examples of how governments respond when financial pressure meets absolute power. In the next few minutes, we'll step inside that world, the dawn raid that reshaped European politics, the banking system that was centuries ahead of its time, and the fatal flaw that turned the Templars' innovation into the cause of their destruction. This isn't just a medieval story. It's a reminder, carved in fire and sealed in history, that money and power have always been at war. And the side that wins isn't always the one that's right. When most people picture the Middle Ages, they imagine knights, castles, and long journeys across unforgiving landscapes. But in the 12th century, there was one journey more dangerous than any battlefield: the pilgrimage to Jerusalem. Tens of thousands of Europeans set out each year, carrying their life savings sewn into belts or hidden under cloaks. And on those long roads across mountains and deserts, bandits knew exactly where to wait. Travelers didn't need to fight armies to lose everything. One ambush was enough. In that world, carrying gold wasn't an inconvenience. It was a death sentence. This was the problem the Knights Templar stepped into, and what they created next would quietly rewrite the rules of global finance. Imagine being a pilgrim in London. You need to reach the holy city, but you can't risk traveling with the wealth your family has scraped together. So you walk to a Templar preceptory, a fortified stone building protected by armed brothers. Inside, you hand over your coins. The Templar clerk records the amount, then gives you a small piece of sheepskin parchment covered in coded marks. A simple letter, but one only the Templars could interpret. That was your lifeline. You would travel hundreds of miles, crossing seas and kingdoms, passing through lands that spoke languages you didn't know. You carried no gold, no silver, nothing worth stealing. But when you finally reached Jerusalem, you walked into another Templar house, handed over that same parchment, and received the exact value you deposited back in London, minus a modest fee. To a modern American, that sounds astonishingly familiar. It's the same principle behind the traveler's check, the same idea used by Western Union, and the same logic behind every wire transfer. But back then, it was nothing short of revolutionary. And the brilliance wasn't merely logistical, it was philosophical. The Templars had done something no one in Europe had ever done before. They had turned money into information. Today, we swipe a card in Boston and our bank deducts the funds instantly, even if the servers are in Chicago or Phoenix. But in the 12th century, this was unheard of. Wealth had to move physically, on horses, on boats, under guard. By replacing gold with a coded document, the Templars decoupled value from physical weight. A traveler wasn't transporting metal anymore, he was transporting trust. And that trust was enforced by the most disciplined military order in Christendom. Their reputation was ironclad. Kings relied on them. Merchants copied them. Ordinary families trusted them with everything they had because the Templars had created a system bigger than any single city or ruler. A network, the first of its kind. This innovation solved a deadly problem for travelers, but its deeper impact reshaped the psychology of money itself. It proved that wealth didn't have to be carried, guarded, or risked on the road. It could exist across distances, stable, secure, and retrievable, simply because a powerful institution said so. And once people experienced that freedom, there was no going back. When your assets could move without you, suddenly the world felt smaller, safer, connected. The Templars didn't set out to invent modern banking, but their need to protect pilgrims sparked an idea that would echo for centuries. And that idea, that money could be represented, transferred, and guaranteed across continents, would become the foundation of the financial world we live in today. But this breakthrough came with a cost. Because any institution capable of storing, moving, and guaranteeing wealth across borders inevitably becomes more powerful than the kings it serves. And as we'll see next, the Templars were about to learn a painful truth. When your financial system grows faster than the government above it, you become a target. And for the Knights Templar, that target would soon come into full view. As the Templars expanded their network, something extraordinary began to take shape. Something the medieval world had never seen, and something our modern world would eventually copy. By the early 13th century, the order controlled more than 9,000 estates across Europe. They operated their own merchant fleet, carrying goods, people, and information across the Mediterranean. Their fortresses, stretching from England to the Holy Land, weren't just military outposts. They were fortified treasuries, financial hubs, and administrative centers all at once. It wasn't a kingdom, it wasn't a church, it wasn't a corporation. It was all three woven together. To appreciate the scale of this system, think of a single organization today that combines the logistics power of Amazon, the financial reach of Bank of America, and the military capability of Blackwater. That's what the Knights Templar represented in the Middle Ages. A structure so vast and integrated that no European ruler could fully understand it, let alone control it. They operated across borders, across cultures, and across currencies at a time when most people never traveled more than 20 miles from where they were born. Their advantage wasn't just size, it was privilege. In 1139, Pope Innocent II issued a decree known as Omne Datum Optimum. On paper, it was written in the ornate Latin of the Church. In reality, it was a financial superpower being granted to a private order. The Templars were now exempt from all local taxes. No king could demand their revenue. No noble could audit their books. And even more astonishing, they were allowed to collect their own tithes, essentially functioning as an independent tax authority within the borders of sovereign nations. Imagine living in a country where a private institution didn't just move money, but could raise money, where they didn't just protect trade routes, but own them, where they didn't just serve the church, they had the legal right to bypass every government standing in their way. That level of autonomy created what medieval chroniclers quietly described as a state within a state. And in many ways, it was the earliest version of what modern political commentators might call a deep state, an entity powerful enough to influence national decisions while remaining insulated from national control. For the Templars, this autonomy was essential to their mission. They needed independence to move troops, to protect pilgrims, to transport wealth safely across continents. But that same independence made them appear untouchable. When they rode through a kingdom, they didn't pay tolls. When they bought land, no royal tax collector could knock on their door. When they built fortresses, they didn't seek permission. And when a king found himself in financial trouble, the Templars were often the ones holding his collateral. It's not hard to see how their power created resentment. Kings who struggled to collect taxes from their own subjects watched the Templars operate freely, efficiently, and profitably within their borders. Nobles who relied on the crown's favor saw a military order with more wealth than most royal houses. And citizens who owed tithes to the church sometimes paid those tithes directly to the Templar network instead. While the Templars saw themselves as servants of God, Europe increasingly saw them as something else, an international institution whose influence reached into every corner of public and private life. And as history has often shown, when an organization becomes too powerful to regulate, governments start to view it less as a partner and more as a threat. This tension between a rising financial empire and the rulers who depended on it was growing steadily beneath the surface. And as we'll see in the next part, the Templars' financial creativity wasn't just clever bookkeeping. It involved loopholes, technicalities, and a mastery of language that allowed them to do what no other Christian order dared to do. Because when the church forbade interest, the Templars found another way. By the early 13th century, the Templars had mastered the art of moving money. But their next challenge was even more complicated: how to lend money in a world where lending itself was considered a sin. The Catholic Church had drawn a hard line. Charging interest was forbidden. Not discouraged, not frowned upon, forbidden. The word was usury, and it carried the weight of moral condemnation. Priests preached against it. Scholars wrote against it. Anyone who profited from interest was believed to be endangering their soul. And yet, kings still needed loans. Wars needed financing. Armies needed to be fed, paid, and armed long before any spoils were collected. So the Templars faced a paradox. They had the safest treasuries, the most reliable network, and the trust of continent-wide clients. But the one product every ruler wanted was illegal. This is where the Templars did something quietly brilliant. Instead of charging interest, they reframed the entire transaction. A borrower wasn't paying for the use of money, he was paying for a service. If someone borrowed 100 coins and repaid 110, that extra 10 wasn't interest. It was a fee, a rent, a charge for handling, safeguarding, or transporting funds, even if the money never left the room. In the ledgers, it might appear as a handling fee, a maintenance fee, or even compensation for risk. The terminology shifted, but the economics stayed the same. If that sounds familiar, it should. Modern Americans see this every day. A bank might not raise your interest rate, but it will add an account maintenance fee. A credit card might offer 0% APR, but charge a balance transfer fee. It's financial engineering, changing the name, not the function. The Templars were doing it 800 years ago. And their clients weren't just ordinary citizens seeking safety. Their real customers were rulers, monarchs juggling wars, debts, and rivalries. A king who needed to raise an army didn't have time to negotiate with local lenders. He wanted speed, security, and discretion. The Templars provided all three. In return, they demanded collateral. Not land deeds, not gold bars, but royal insignia, crown jewels, even the crown itself. Imagine a modern president walking into a bank and placing a national treasure on the counter as security for a loan. That was the level of desperation kings often faced, and the level of trust the Templars commanded. They held the symbols of monarchy in their vaults, not as trophies, but as guarantees. These arrangements created a strange dynamic. Kings, who were sworn to rule by divine right, were placing their authority, literally, into the hands of a religious order. And those hands were steady, disciplined, and governed by their own laws. The Templars weren't being reckless, they were being pragmatic. But every successful loan widened the gap between their influence and the power of the crown. And yet the church said nothing. Because as long as the mechanics of usury were disguised, no rule was technically broken. The Templars stayed righteous, the kings stayed grateful, and the system grew stronger. But with each workaround, each service fee, each royal pledge sealed behind stone walls, the Templars stepped a little further into a role no one had imagined for them: the financial backbone of Europe. And that role would soon push them into direct conflict with a monarch who needed them more than anyone else and hated them more than he could ever admit. Because the king who borrowed the most would become the king who struck the hardest. By the dawn of the 14th century, the balance of power in Europe was shifting, and nowhere was the pressure more intense than in France. Its ruler, King Philip IV, known to history as Philip the Fair, was admired for his regal appearance, but feared for his relentless ambition. On the surface, he looked like a king in command. Behind the scenes, he was a monarch drowning in debt. France had been locked in a grinding conflict with England, a war that drained the treasury faster than taxes could replenish it. Philip tried every method available to raise money. He taxed Jewish communities heavily, then expelled them to seize what remained of their property. When that wasn't enough, he turned to the currency itself. Coins that once carried solid gold were quietly diluted with lesser metals. It was the medieval version of printing money, an early form of debasement. At first, people didn't notice. But as prices rose and trust in the currency eroded, the public grew restless. Still, Philip needed more. So he went to the one institution with deeper pockets and broader reach than any royal house: the Knights Templar. At first, the relationship looked like a partnership. The Templars loaned him money, managed his treasury, and served as his most reliable financial lifeline. But soon the numbers grew staggering. Philip borrowed to pay soldiers. He borrowed to buy influence. He borrowed to hold together a kingdom straining under the weight of war. And then he reached the limit. When Philip approached the Templars once more, seeking yet another enormous loan, the order refused. It wasn't personal, it was arithmetic. Their rules, their discipline, their structure didn't allow endless credit, even to a king. But to Philip, that refusal felt like a humiliation, a challenge, a threat. In that moment, he saw the world with painful clarity. His political power, his ability to wage war, to govern, to command, was now overshadowed by the financial power of a religious order. And the realization terrified him. Because if the Templars could say no to a king, what else could they say no to? What influence could they exert simply by choosing whom to fund, whom to support, and whom to deny? To Philip, sovereignty itself was at stake, and so he made a decision that would change the course of history. He would not out-negotiate the Templars. He would not persuade them. He would not repay them. Instead, he would eliminate the problem at its root. He would seize their wealth, destroy their leadership, and absorb their resources into the French crown. This wasn't policy, it wasn't diplomacy, it was the cold logic of survival. Philip's plan was ruthless in its simplicity: nationalize the Templar Empire through force, and he justified it the only way a king could, by turning financial conflict into moral scandal. If he could portray the Templars as heretics, as enemies of the faith, as sinners hiding behind armor and piety, then every royal action would appear righteous. But beneath the accusations, beneath the propaganda, the truth was unmistakable. Philip's kingdom was collapsing under its own weight. His wars had emptied his coffers, his policies had failed, and the Templars were the last major institution he could not control. So he turned the full power of the crown against the very order that had once funded his success. The stage was set, the tension was reaching its breaking point, and soon the dawn raid that would become infamous, Friday the 13th, 1307, would reveal just how far a desperate king was willing to go when financial survival became political warfare. And what followed was one of the most brutal purges in medieval history. When King Philip finally struck, the blow was brutal, calculated, and absolute. Across France, Templar knights, men who had spent their lives defending pilgrims and protecting sacred roots, were dragged from their homes and thrown into cold, windowless cells. What happened next marked the darkest chapter of the order's history. Under royal command, interrogators used every method available to force confessions to crimes that had never occurred. The accusations were grotesque, ranging from heresy to secret rituals, each designed to shock the public and justify the king's actions. The knights resisted as long as they could, but pain, isolation, and fear eventually broke many of them. Their forced confessions became Philip's shield, his proof, his moral disguise. At the center of this storm stood the order's last Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, a man in his 70s, weary from imprisonment, yet still unwilling to betray the truth. After years of captivity, he was led to a wooden scaffold erected in front of Notre Dame Cathedral, the heart of Paris, the heart of France, the heart of Christendom. There, in the spring of 1314, he was bound to a stake and set ablaze. Flames rose around him as crowds watched, stunned by the spectacle of a revered knight dying not on a battlefield, but at the hands of the king he once served. Before the fire consumed him, de Molay's voice carried across the square. In that final moment, he issued a curse, cold, direct, and unforgettable. He summoned both King Philip and Pope Clement V, demanding they stand with him before the judgment of God within a year. For a medieval audience, this was not merely defiance, it was prophecy. And what happened next only intensified the legend. Within months, Pope Clement V fell ill and died under mysterious circumstances. King Philip followed shortly after, struck down unexpectedly at a hunting trip. Two of the most powerful men in Europe, gone within the span de Molay had foreseen. Even today, historians debate whether it was coincidence or fate. For many, it became a story whispered across taverns and courts, a reminder that earthly power has its limits. But even with the Templars destroyed and their leadership executed, one mystery remained unsolved: the treasure. Philip seized the order's lands, buildings, and fortresses, but the vast reserves of gold and silver he expected to find had vanished. Contemporary records describe empty vaults, abandoned strongrooms, and treasuries cleared long before the arrests. Some believe the wealth was hidden. Others say it was moved across borders. A few suggest it was absorbed into emerging secret societies, rumors that centuries later would fuel theories linking the Templars to the Freemasons and other shadowy groups. What mattered most to Philip was simple. The financial empire he feared had been shattered. But the ideas the Templars created, their banking systems, their global networks, their understanding that power follows money, those would survive long after the flames at Notre Dame died out. And in the next section, we'll explore why the fall of the Templars wasn't just the end of a military order. It was a warning, a reminder of what happens when financial power grows too large for political authority to contain. When the flames at Notre Dame died and the Templar fortresses fell silent, Europe believed it had witnessed the end of a military order. But history has a long memory, and the deeper truth is this. The Templars were the first to understand the power of a global financial network. Long before wire transfers, long before central banks, long before any modern institution learned to move value across borders, they proved that money flows faster and more freely when it no longer depends on physical weight. Their rise was revolutionary, but their fall carries the lesson that matters most today. Because every time financial power grows too large, too efficient, or too independent, it collides with something even more ancient: political authority. And when those two forces meet, the outcome is rarely peaceful. The Templars learned that a government with empty coffers doesn't negotiate. It doesn't compromise. It doesn't accept limits. When taxation fails and debt becomes unbearable, rulers throughout history have turned to the same solution: confiscation, the seizure of wealth, the rewriting of laws, the repurposing of morality to justify power. King Philip didn't destroy the Templars because they were sinful. He destroyed them because they were solvent. And that is the warning that echoes across 7 centuries. When you place all your assets under one authority, one system, or one institution, when everything you own sits where a single decision maker can reach it, you face the same centralization risk that brought down the Templars. Their story reminds us that independence is not just a virtue, it is a shield. Today we don't ride horses to carry gold across kingdoms. We use wire transfers, SWIFT codes, online banking, digital assets, a system more global than anything the Templars could have imagined. But the question they faced is the same one we face now. When wealth becomes information, when value is stored in systems rather than vaults, how safe is it from the modern versions of a king in crisis? And that brings us to the heart of the takeaway. The Templars were undone not by their enemies, nor their beliefs, but by a simple imbalance. Their financial strength outgrew the political world around them, and the world reacted. So ask yourself, in an age of digital money and international networks, what happens when power and finance collide again? What happens when governments strain under debt, when currencies wobble, when public trust begins to crack? That's the journey this channel is built to explore. Because understanding history isn't nostalgia, it's preparation. If you want to dive deeper into how money, power, and politics shape our world, if you want to understand how past collapses warn us about future ones, then this is where you belong. Subscribe to Econ Atlas and continue the quest to decode the financial forces that have shaped civilization and still shape your life today.